We're on to week 2 of this magical journey, ranking the top 10 players at every single NBA position. We're going to cap off this stretch with our top 50 players, but today, Tuesday, for the two guards. Should be tons of fun. If you enjoy, support us down below. Let's get into it. Starting off here with some basic criteria, and this is the same criteria I had for last year's list. What have you done for me lately? In the last year and a half or so, I take into account your availability, your skill, of course, how good are you as a basketball player, especially on the, do you have two-way ability, your team success, and of course, your situation. So if you're a good player on a bad team, I'm not going to dock you, right? Especially if it's not your fault how that team has been constructed. Outside of that, individual stats, individual moments, I take into account everything over the last year and a half or so. The last thing I'll mention as far as criteria is that these positions are based on my projected lineups for every team next season. So if you have any questions on why is he here and not there as far as what position he's listed at, let me know in the comments. I'll respond to you as quickly as I possibly can. We have some young guns here and, of course, some veterans as well. Guys like Brandon Miller, who is on the Team USA Select team. He should come back better than ever in year number 2. Jaden Ivey, we just need him to be healthy, but when he's healthy, he can give you about 15 to 20 points a night there in Detroit. But some veterans, guys like Kelly Oubre, Colin Sexton, Norman Powell, of course, are on these lists. Now, here's an argument that I had. You can argue that Kelly Oubre could be the 3 and have Paul George at the 2. That is something that I went back and forth on, but Kelly Oubre played the 2 when he played last season, so I just kept it as is. So, again, for the Sixers, for example, Oubre's the 2, Paul George is the 3, so watch out for PG next week. Some other honorable mentions. See, these are some guys that either took a step back from last year or, they just had some injuries in Ben Matherin's case. But Austin Reeves, Dante DiVincenzo, Jordan Poole, Devin Vassell, some of these guys are very underrated. Ben Mathurin, of course, is such an underrated young scorer in the league, but since he plays for Indiana, doesn't get a lot of press, I want to show him his flowers. But these are the top 5 honorable mentions, and let me know. I have another one as well. Let me know, who you would put on the list, because I think really from 7 down, you can make an argument that any of these players can be in any order, including these 5 honorable mentions you see on your screen. Guys like Anthony Simons could easily be on this list. Herb Jones and Marcus Smart, for their defensive two-way ability, Caruso as well, can easily be on this list. And if you just want to have a veteran, a guy that kind of does it all, KCP, I wouldn't hate you if you had him on this list. But another guy, of course, is Tyler Hero that is not on the list. And you can make an argument for all 5 and even 6 of those guys to be over my number 10 or number 9 guy. But at number 10, let's just get into it. CJ McCollum, a guy that's still giving you 20, 4.5, and 4.5 a night, still giving you good efficiency. And sure, the way that he ended the season, going on the drought that he did from the play-in on, definitely left a sour taste in my mouth, and of course, probably you guys at home as well. Not the greatest sign for CJ to end the season like he did, but he's still a guy that was a great leader, a great secondary scorer for this Pelicans team all season, and he just ended the season on a bad stretch. And part of that is because the team was adjusting again to playing without their best player in Zion Williamson. Not to mention, if we want to harp on CJ for ending the season bad, we got to talk about Brandon Ingram as well. He ended the season bad. The best 2 players on the Pelicans to end the season last year in the playoffs was Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. Most notably Trey Murphy, if we really want to dive into it. But CJ McCollum is still a talented guard. Still, I think, is in the secondary or third string role as far as go-to guys. He's still giving them great production on a nightly basis, and I want to have him at number 10. Again, you can argue he could be off the list for one of those guys that were an honorable mention. Derek White at number 9. Could he be number 8? I think so. He could be number 7 on this list. Depending on how much you value his two-way ability, I value it really high. But he's still giving you solid numbers. Again, this is the guy that is probably the 5th go-to scorer in that starting lineup. But he's giving you 15, 4, and 5. And it was so fun to watch Derek White down the stretch last season. After the All-Star break, it seemed like he was a different scorer and a different shooter, especially in the postseason, because he was giving them 30-point performances. He had that one game against the Heat where he had almost 30 in the first half, which was absolutely crazy. and I remember it vividly because I bet on his under that day. But Derek White, tremendous two-way player. He's now on Team USA. Maybe he gets a little bit better next season, but ultimately, if he stays the same player next year, he's going to give them all NBA defense and, of course, very good offensive production and shooting ability. That's going to help this team compete for yet again another title next season. Derek White, the ultimate glue guy in the NBA today, maybe outside of Drew Holiday, right? But they're teammates. At number 8, Malik Monk. If you want to make an argument that he's number 10, again, these guys are interchangeable. He is at number 8 because I watch Malik Monk and I see such a talented scorer with the basketball. A guy that can take over games for the Sacramento Kings, and he might be the best overall bench player in the NBA today. But he's giving you 15 and a half, 5 assists. If he stayed healthy, he would have been the runaway sixth man of the year again, of course, 2 years in a row. But he's shooting decently from the field. He's above Derek White for simply the fact that he can take over games. I think at a higher level than Derek White. But again, Derek White gives you more defense, and Derek White also has that potential to take over games. And this is what I mean. It's so hard to rank some of these guys because there's so much that goes into it, and it really depends on what you value. But honestly, as I'm talking to you guys, I think I'd move Derek White to number 8 over Malik Monk, but to each there's on. At number 7, this is where we get into the rankings where I think these aren't interchangeable. I like exactly where some of these guys are placed. And we're going to start here with Jaylen Green, a guy that had a breakout season as far as we saw a different player, and we saw a more aggressive player this past season in Jaylen Green. He wasn't as much of a shot chucker as he was early on in his career, but you can't really blame him with what was around him in the first year or so of his career. But he's giving you almost 20 points, 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists a night. Good efficiency considering how much volume he did have this year. But him and Sengun have set the tone for this Rockets franchise going forward. They now have their 2 go-to guys going forward. They're 2 leaders. They're 2 franchise cornerstones. And, if there was any questions going into last year, they were answered by Jaylen Green and, of course, Alperen Sengun most notably. But such a talented young scorer. He's bouncy. Of course, he's athletic as ever. His defense, maybe a little bit on the average, subpar level, but he's so young. And defense is all about effort. With his athletic ability and the fact that this team is a very well-built team, it's very underrated there in Houston. Jaylen Green, I think, could take a step up defensively next season. And if he can, he's going to enter the top 5 conversation in this position next season, as crazy as that might sound. But Jaylen Green, at number 7. At number 6, we have Macau Bridges. Might come as a little bit of a shock, but this is the same argument that I had for Derek White over a guy like Malik Monk. If 2 players are on the same tier, I'm going to prefer the guy that gives me, well, preferably elite two-way ability, a guy that is going to play every single game. And of course, in this case, I'm going to take Macau Bridges over Jaylen Green. Might be a shock. I understand that Jaylen Green is a far superior offensive shot creator. However, Macau Bridges is giving you just about the same offensive production. However, he's more efficient, and he's going to go out there every single night. He's an Iron Man, and he's going to go take the best defensive assignment available. He's going to guard the LeBron James of the world. He's going to guard the Steph Currys of the world. Macau Bridges is such a great addition for this New York Knicks team. And again, this is a guy that at moments can be the go-to scorer for a team. I think he's heavily underrated on the offensive side of the ball. But over there in Brooklyn, when he first got traded there, let's not forget there was a stretch, a decent 20 to 30 game stretch, where he was giving them 25 to 26 points a night. Now, since that point, it's only been about 20 points a night, but it's still, he doesn't need to be the go-to scorer here in New York. He just needs to be the all-NBA level defender that we know he is. And if he does that, and if he's healthy, and if he's giving them great spacing ability, I think he's going to play his best basketball next season, even if that's not in the statistical department. But Macau Bridges, I'm a big fan of him. And again, at 27 years old, he might only be entering his prime as an NBA defender and player. Let's get into the top 5. Zack LaVine. And this is, again, that argument where I'm balancing where, do you prefer the offensive juggernauts, guys like Zack LaVine, Malik Monk, and guys like Jaylen Green? Or do you prefer the two-way ability of the Macau Bridges and Derek Whites of the world? That is an argument in its own. But Zach LaVine to me is heavily underrated, and I understand he's a bit of a diva off the court because of his situation there in Chicago, but he's still a great scorer. He's still a go-to guy on pretty much 80% of NBA teams if you were to throw him in, again, on the majority of teams. But he's still giving you about 20 and 5 a night. And again, this is a down season for Zach LaVine. Throughout his time in Chicago, he's given them about 22 to 25 a night on way better efficiency from the floor, but he just has that ability to take over. And this is going to be one of my bailouts where I say off the eye test, Zach LaVine, of course, he's more than a dunker, but he's such an underrated offensive scorer. And based off the eye test, he's just better than Macau Bridges. And that's really what I came down to at the end of the day, to have him here in the top 5. So again, Zach LaVine, Macau Bridges, keep in mind a lot of these guys are interchangeable by 1 or 2 spots. What's not interchangeable is this top 4. However you want to have these top 4, well, I'll say this. However you want to have 2, 3, and 4 is interchangeable. All depends on what you like. But at number one solidified, and I think we can all pick up on who that's going to be. But at 2C, a guy in Kyrie Irving that is technically moving down a spot, but I have him at 2C. This is a guy that was giving you 25 and a half, 5 and 5 a night. He was such a tremendous playoff player, and this year he really adapted to a new role there in Dallas. Instead of just trying to be the offensive, showing off his offensive brilliance that we know Kyrie has always done in his career on a nightly basis, he decided to, commit to the defensive end a lot more this season. And we saw that a lot in the playoffs, taking those tough assignments, being more of a facilitator, but giving them a bucket when they need it instead of every single possession. Kyrie Irving at 32 years old is evolving his game. That's something that's unprecedented. Not a lot of players will evolve their game at an elite level this late into their careers. Maybe it's my bias. Maybe it's because I'm a Cavs fan and I love Kyrie Irving. But to me, he's still an elite 2 guard. He's still going to be a guy that for years to come is not going to fall off. And until he retires, he's going to be probably one of the best ISO players in the game. Of course, we may have never seen a player with a deeper bag and a deeper skill set than Kyrie Irving at his shorter frame as far as height. But Kyrie Irving, such an amazing player, and he definitely is still an elite player in the league today. Is he top 20 in the league? We'll have to find out in a couple weeks. The next 2 guys are in that same tier as well, and again, it really just depends on what you prefer. But Devin Booker and Donovan Mitchell, we have this conversation a lot off the podcast. Of course, if you've been following the channel for a while, you know Bakari, but we have this discussion a lot. We're Cavs fans, so naturally you would think that we would prefer Donovan Mitchell. But I think we both come to that same sentiment that if you want a leader, if you're starting a franchise from scratch, you want Donovan Mitchell, right? But if you just want the better overall basketball player, it's Donovan Mitchell the majority of the time. So it really depends on what you prefer. Both of them give you about the same defensive effort, but both of them can be that go-to scorer on a nightly basis. The only reason why you might have Mitchell higher is because he was the leader of a team that had more success in the playoffs. But you can also go back to a couple years ago when Donovan Mitchell was the go-to guy on a team that went to the NBA Finals after winning 60-plus games. So you can make the leader argument, for both sides. Honestly, if I had to choose a specific order, I would probably go with Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, Kyrie Irving in that order. But these players are in the same tier for a reason. They're so very close. But if you want my 2 cents, there it is. Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, Kyrie Irving in that order. But they're so talented and so close. I'm going to show respect to all of them. But at number 1, we have Ant-Man. Maybe the next face of the league. Maybe he is Michael Jordan's son. 26, 5.5, and 5 a night. Great defense. And of course, if you want to talk about the complete package at the 2-guard position, that is Anthony Edwards. He gives you that swagger, that leadership, that dominance on the court. And there's times now where even with Team USA, some of the best players in the world, Anthony Edwards has looked like the best player on the court and the best scorer on the team on most nights so far in some of these scrimmages, especially, I'll say at least 2 of the 3 scrimmages so far. Anthony Edwards has looked like the best player on the court sometimes. And that shows a lot about this young 22-year-old guard that a lot of people are saying could be the next face of the league. once LeBron James decides to hang it up. But Anthony Edwards, such an amazing young player. I don't think there's any argument as far as if he is or if he's not better than the guys listed below him. Anthony Edwards is a top 10 player in the NBA today. You heard it first. He might be number 10 in my eyes, but he is in the top 10 as far as players going forward, and he's only 22 years old. The NBA is in pretty good hands, even though I don't like to believe it or admit it, because I grew up with the generation that is slowly fading away in the NBA today. But what I want to do, and I did this last week, and of course I predicted Cade Cunningham, a guy that was not a top 10 point guard, but should enter that list this upcoming season. I think we might, I want to do that here at the 2 guard position as well. Now, you could make an argument for a lot of different guys. You can make an argument for some guys that missed the list barely. But what I want to do, I want to show some love to a guy that I think is heavily underrated, a guy that is in that Derek White conversation. Where do you prefer the scores, guys that could be go-to guys on a nightly basis, or do you prefer the all NBA level defense and somewhat decent two-way ability in a guy like Herb Jones, which is what I'm going to go with here. I think Herb Jones is so underrated, and a guy that whether if he's the 2 or the 3 for the Pelicans this upcoming season, he's going to play such an amazing role. He should be in the 6th Man of the Year conversations going into next season. Again, I just like that elite two-way ability, and if he can jump his game up from 11 points to, let's say, 15 points a night, I think there's no doubt he's going to be in this list next season, just like Derek White made that jump this past season. On this day in NBA history, if we want to look into, of course, the bubble, which I talked about last week, last week we talked about how that was the day that marked the NBA returning after that hiatus with the virus. But for this day in NBA history, looking back in time, Rudy Gobert had 2 very clutch free throws to end off this game against the New Orleans Pelicans. And this was also the first ever regular season game back after the NBA came back to the bubble, after, of course, a couple-month hiatus. Last week marked the start of the scrimmage games. This week marked the start of the regular season games. Still, it's a very weird and fun time to look back on. The NBA bubble, what a time for us NBA fans. But that's episode 195. This upcoming Thursday, I want to throw it out there. We have, of course, we're entering the month of August. Football is right around the corner. We're going to be doing our preseason NFL Power Rankings. Should be tons of fun. But outside of that, we have our fantasy football content on the channel as well. And going into the future, the next 4 Tuesdays here on the channel, we'll be going through the remaining positions, the small forward, power forward, center, and then also the top 50 players in the NBA today. So if that interests you, support us down below, of course, and turn on the bell for notifications. We post around 1 p.m. Eastern every single day. But until then, stay happy, stay healthy. We'll see you guys on Thursday. Get out of here.